Okay, let's call to order the Wednesday, January 26, 2022 meeting of the Village of Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Brum,
I'm here.
Commissioner Marhol,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Matthews,
John, you're on mute.
Commissioner Peltier.
Sorry, I'm Matthews is here.
Oop.
Got it.
Okay.
And Commissioner Pelletier is here.
With Commissioner Hennigan absent. Oh, and Chairperson Mateo, sorry.
I am here, so we have a quorum. Attorney Mars, you have some legalese for us?
I do indeed. So once again, we are remote due to the ongoing public health emergency. And so consistent with the governor's most recent emergency declaration, various executive orders entered by the governor and amendments made to the Open Meetings Act last year, we are able to conduct this meeting electronically. If anybody has any issues hearing at any time, please let the moderator know. And just a reminder to everyone that all votes must be roll call votes. Thank you.
Thank you. And according to these executive orders, we do have staff present at the village offices. Okay, do we have a motion to approve the Planning and Zoning Commission's special meeting from January 5th, 2022? And remember, if you're in a,
Motion to approve.
if you're in a quiet space, you can leave yourself off mute. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any edits? Okay, please call the roll.
Commissioner Brum,
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews,
Aye.
Commissioner Peltier,
Aye.
and Chairperson Mateo.
Aye. Motion carries. Next on our agenda, visitors, petitions, citizen requests, and communications. Is there anyone who wants to speak in the audience at this part of the meeting? Hearing none, we'll move on to the liaison report, village board update.
There was no update. There was no meeting last week for the village board.
But they did in their first meeting in January approve the special use and variations for the Harlem lot.
Yes, correct.
Record time after our January 5th meeting. Okay, then I'll call to order PZ 2201, a public hearing to consider a variation from section 1073 F2A, accessory structures and uses of the village of the Riverside zoning ordinance to build a fence up to 5 feet in height on a corner lot and street yard at 40 Kimbark Road. The petitioner is John Sheeman. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Marhol,
Here.
Commissioner Brum,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Peltier,
Here.
Commissioner Matthews,
Here.
and Chairperson Mateo.
Here, we still have a quorum. A public notice was published in the Riverside Brookfield Landmark on January 5th, 2022, and will be entered into the record as an exhibit. So if somebody anticipates providing testimony, will you please stand if you're able and raise your right hand to be sworn in? Mr. Sheeman, will you be speaking?
Yeah, I'll speak during this, but I didn't know if you needed me or if it was someone else that's randomly on the meeting.
Okay.
You and if anyone else is in the audience, if you could put your camera on for this this portion if you intend to speak, so we can see you being sworn in.
Diane, I can't see all of your last name. Do you plan on speaking on this subject? Okay, Mr. Sheeman, if you would stand and raise your right hand, please. I know it's awkward on Zoom. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you. Francisco, will you provide us with the summary?
Sure. Let's see. Let me see if I can pull up example packet. Okay, so the petitioner is seeking a variation from section 1073 F2A. His property is located at 40 Kimbark Road. Currently, there is there's no fence there on the lot. Let me pull up a survey here. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see that, hopefully?
Yes.
So this is the survey of the property. So the petitioner is seeking to enclose, I didn't highlight this very well, but this section of the property. So to the east, that fronts Kimbark, and then the fence here on the southern portion that fronts Forest, to the rear of the property here where the garage is, and then a portion of the property here on the northern end of the property. The first, I guess, section, if you want to call it that, of the fence would be 4 feet in height, and then the rest from about, I believe it's 30 feet from the house, from the front of the house toward the end of the property, would be up to 6 feet in height. It is a privacy fence. And then this section in the back here on the northern end of the property would also be 6 feet in height and a property fence. The current ordinance states that because this is a corner lot, it is determined to have 2 street fronts. So it would be the front that faces Kimbark and this portion here on the south side of the property that fronts Forest Avenue. So per the ordinance, fences can't be built on that, on those street yards. There is also the concern of a site obstruction on the property. The site triangle states that nothing can be in an area of the first, I believe it's the first 25 feet on the shorter end of the property, and then 50 feet back on the longer end of the property. We did do some research with some other properties around the village. There is one property nearby at 100 Forest that has a fence there, and I'll pull this up. So this is 100 Forest here. This is in the corner, and the fence is a 6-foot fence toward the rear of the house. So it doesn't, so this is different from what the petitioner is seeking in that it's further toward the back of the property. And then this is a wider angle here. Here's the beginning of the fence. And it goes toward the back, toward, I don't know if there's an alley back there, but the garage. And then it closes down in the back. And this is the rear of the house here. We did do a little bit of research for 100 Forest. It turns out that this fence has been here since the 70s. And there was a permit in 2010 to replace a fence. We're assuming it was the original fence. I couldn't find any more information on that, but the 2010 permit was to replace a fence. And then there was another permit in 2016 to, again, replace the fence. So this is something that, it's been there since the 70s. So even though it's non-conforming because it's been there since the 70s and it's just been replaced in the same location, it doesn't create another nonconformity, which the ordinance states would be allowed, as it's not creating another conformity. It's not being moved. It's not being changed in height or anything like that. The next property we looked at that the petitioner also pointed out is 478 Kent Road. So this is from the corner looking back toward the property, and then this is the fence itself. This one was permitted. This particular fence was permitted, in 2012. Again, difference between this and what the petitioner is seeking is that it's toward the rear of the house. It's 4 feet in height. It's not necessarily transparent, but you can see through if you're walking by. If you're driving by as well, you can't see it from the street. From this picture here, it's only when you're driving on the other end of the property that you finally see it. This is also, according to the notes that we found in our system and in the permits, also a replacement fence. So, you know, we think there was another fence there before. We're not 100% sure because of couldn't find the records, but the way the inspector phrased it was that it was a replacement fence for something that was there prior. This is another angle of the fence there at 478 Kent. So as you're driving down Kent, you can't really see it from that road. And then if you turn left onto Selborne, you would see it as you're going further down back toward the property. And this property, these two properties, 471 Long Common and 479, also similar to this previous property on Kent, in that they are about 4 feet high. Can't see them from the other street. If you're driving by, there's no obstruction. So they're also toward the rear of the house. And then this particular one is just a wood picket fence. So again, there's that difference between what the petitioner is seeking and what these are currently there. 471 Long Common was also permitted. And then 479 Long Common, I believe, was also permitted. And then here's another picture of 479 Long Common as you're driving down the other street. And then Ashley and I also reviewed a property earlier or late last year at 176 Riverside, which is also a 4-foot high fence. And it's also similar to the property at 225 Quincy, which was included in the packet. Ashley and I spoke about 176 Riverside when it was brought in, and we decided that it was an appropriate fence because of the location that it was in. So let me look up. So it's very similar to the location of the fence here at 225 Quincy. So it runs from the end of the house in the rear to the garage to kind of close off that space. And then it has a fence on this side, like 225 Quincy. So both of those properties are similar. So we decided when that permit came in that it was an appropriate location for the fence, just because it was off of the sidewalk and it only connected the house to the garage. It ran flush to those two structures there on the property.
Francisco, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
That red short fence there, do you consider that in the rear yard? Or is it
Yes,
street yard?
in the rear yard.
Okay, thank you
Mhm.
for clarification.
Yep. That's what I have for you guys. If you have any other questions, you can ask.
Questions for staff?
Could I add a couple properties that I have pictures of in addition to the ones shown from that Francisco shown? I have pictures of them as well in Riverside, similar setups. If I could share my screen, please.
Without seeing the plats, I'm not sure how much we can gather from those.
Okay, well, that's all right. There was a couple other ones that I had shown him as well, and I saw one actually recently too, but I took pictures off Google Map and kind of show where it is. But in addition, just similar setup to kind of what I'm requesting as well.
Let the record note that Commissioner Hennigan is now with us. Mr. Sheeman, now you can please present your case.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I gotta get up my email here. Are we able to see it, I believe?
Yes, sir.
All right, this one's off Northgate and Westover. So this is 106 Northgate Road. I've got a link to this Google map if we want to see more of a, for sure where it is in Riverside. As we can see, it's Riverside here, but very similar. This one actually goes to the front of the house. They got a 6-foot fence here at the, towards their driveway. This looks like maybe 3 or 4 feet, and this one goes to the other front of the home. Again, if I Google map it, click on this map to show in retrospect where it is. If I back it up, this is the property, kind of take the corner lot. Shows here. Back here. So again, very similar. They're actually coming to the front of the house, which I know some of the other ones were more distinctly towards the side and the back. And then this takes us all the way out to, I don't know if this is 26, I'm not sure. As far as another property that I saw as well in addition, obviously Francisco did a great job. I appreciate it. He's been very helpful throughout the process. This other one was 285 Herrick, which I thought was very similar, kind of in the aspect of what I'm trying to do. So it's also on the corner of Herbert Road. So I'll just show a couple of pictures and then I could zoom out Google Maps style if that helps at all. So this is the front of the house that he's actually on Herrick. So very similar. His house is facing, the regularly, and where I'm requesting, would be considered side yard, street yard fence. So this goes kind of from the side of the house. And this actually encompasses their garage as well. So the fence kind of goes all the way over. And if I look at it from, Google Maps standpoint, because I know obviously I don't have a plot of survey on me, so to speak. Again, this is Herrick. And then we come up to the corner, oops, here. You can see, obviously, then it comes up. And this is a property that has, similar fencing there as well. One other one not mentioned, it's not really, I'd say all those ones that we've shown are corner houses. And I know that's kind of unique, and especially the placement of homes. But one that Google Maps didn't really have pictures of it. But this is Scottswood Road. They basically have a fence. Google Map didn't have a fence or a picture of it. If I showed the house, I'd have bushes all in front of it. But it does have a unique property where, they've kind of went into the street yard, so to speak, up to the sidewalk with the fence. And I'll kind of show where it is via Google Map, although it doesn't show it because there'd be a lot of trees and bushes in front of the fence. But this is the property via Google Map, and obviously this where the bushes are kind of where it's shown, where that fence is actually at. So it actually comes up to the street yard aspect of it. So as far as showing my screen, that's pretty much it for it. I don't know how to log out of that aspect of it. Hold on 1 second. Just want to show one more thing, and similarly, as we looked at some of those houses and what we're trying to do, again, my house faces, Kimbark. It's a very busy road, and I know in one of the, the variants, not the variants in the zoning, booklet you guys have, saying it doesn't allow street yards except for street yards are, adjoins non-residential use or along 26th Street, 31st or York Road, subject to further review by village staff. Along street yards that adjoin 26th, 31st Street or York Road, a fence shall not exceed 6 feet in height. I really think Forest Avenue is probably one of the busiest streets in Riverside. To be honest, I live on it. I see how many people blow through these stop signs, throw garbage in my yard and all of those things. And how many people are physically walking by my house, and whether that's going to school or whether there's a train or whatever it is, and how much traffic there is on there. So I consider, this street to be very busy. And if we look at the layout of my house, it's in the northeast corner. Most of my yard and house is, is this what would be considered street yard, which in the verbiage, even in the packet of information that you guys provide with all the different bylaws and whatnot, it's very unclear. I think it's very foggy. Even when I bought the home, I had no idea that I would not be able to put a fence in there. Driving around the neighborhood, seeing other fences, obviously it shows, that there are such fences. Again, if we're looking at kind of this aspect, this whole side of my yard here is a huge portion of it. When I initially put in the permit, I wasn't thinking I was going to be denied because I was following suit of 40 feet to the house, which would be kind of coming back to almost where my side door kicks out would be 4 feet. And then the rest of it is 6 feet back. So I was following what I thought was the initial code for it. As you can see too, I don't have a back door at all. I have a side door for my yard. So, you know, if I was just going straight from my house back to my garage, I wouldn't even be able to even let my dog out, or my daughter, I have a 4-year-old daughter and I have a dog, to even go play in the yard. I would literally be letting them out into, you know, a busy street. Again, where the yellow is kind of where I was wanting to put a 4-foot fence and then 6 foot back here with privacy. So that was the initial thought, just because I was looking at what the code seemed to be in there. So I appreciate your time. And if I know if there's any other questions, I know I'd like to hear if there's anything else you guys would like to say. And then if there's anything else I need to bring up or speak on. Thank you for your time.
We can't hear you, Chairperson Mateo.
I'm like, wait, you're muted. Oh, wait, I'm muted. Did you have any comments on any of the properties that Mr. Sheeman showed?
Yes, I was able to check in our system for the ones that weren't addressed by staff that were also identified by Mr. Sheeman, 285 Herrick and 180 Scottswood. Our system, while not perfect and not a full historical record of permitting, doesn't show any fencing permits. So that would either indicate that they put in a fence without a permit at any certain time, or that fencing was at one time permitted by allowance by the village and is so old that we wouldn't have a current record of that. So it's possible that they would have replaced it or repaired something one for one, but just noting that since there have been other examples that were shown by staff of fences in existence in that street yard.
I jump in for 285 Herrick. So the fence actually will be coming down because it fell, I think, during a storm or something. So the homeowner is deciding to just get rid of it. But I believe I did find a permit in one of our paper files. I think it's from sometime in the 80s. But that fence is also in the right of way. So that also presents its own issues in terms of being rebuilt. So she's just decided to get rid of it because it was just in bad condition.
So our codes do evolve and things might be existing now that are not conforming to our current codes. And those look to be examples of such fences. Anybody have questions for Mr. Sheeman?
Was there, after seeing the other fences that are generally 4 feet and open, did you ever consider revising your plans?
I did not. Reason being is there's nothing in the codes that says anything about closed fencing. I know that, I understand the concept of, we want open spaces and see that, but I don't see how that applies directly to someone's property. Looking at the fencing, there's nothing that I've read in the code book that says anything about spacing or anything like that. I understand maybe that's someone's preference, but I would imagine that most people would put up a fence, partially as privacy, also size is just because of my dog. Preferably 6 foot fence is what I want, but I was just trying to follow what the current code said. If my property wasn't on a corner, I wouldn't have to have this meeting with you at all. It would have probably been approved very quickly and it would have been done. So I understand every house is unique. And especially I think corner lot houses are unique, where I think the street yard isn't the same, apply the same, because the house positioning is different. than a normal house. Because, you know, especially mine, it'd be a little different if my house was facing Forest Avenue and I'm talking about putting a front yard fence, but my house faces Kimbark. So technically my side yard to me doesn't look like a front yard or a street yard. That's majority of my normal yard. And if you had a house that had a neighbor on a normal side, if I had a neighbor on the other side of the property, it would be a fence we wouldn't talk about. So I never really thought about changing the size just because I was trying to go by what the code was for any property, trying to build a fence where 40 feet into it is 4 feet. And then after 40 feet, you can go up to 6 feet in height. So that was the logic behind it.
Other questions?
Mr. Sheeman, what are your thoughts with regard to any sort of site obstruction that could result, especially in the area of where your proposed 4 feet fence would be? Would you
Still
consider?
believe it's, I understand what you're saying because obviously there's a stop sign there. I believe it's set back further enough from that area that it wouldn't be an obstruction from that. I mean, if we take Riverside out of this equation and we went across the street to Brookfield, we could see so many fences that have the identical thing that I'm doing, and actually would probably put a 6-foot fence all the way up. And I used to live in Brookfield prior to here. My neighbor across the street put a 6-foot fence up identical to what I'm talking about all the way up there at a stop sign. Never was a problem. I used to live at a corner house in Brookfield and it was never an issue. So I understand each town is different, but it was never a problem. I lived across the street from him. There was no accidents, no issues, no sightline distraction. And he had a 6-foot fence there. So from personal experience living, obviously in a different town, but very similar fencing and setup, I don't believe so.
What material do you propose to use with regard to a fence?
Initially, I was going to use wood, but it just depends on, I believe what you approve. I know in past you guys allowed some vinyl, but now vinyl's off the table unless Francisco told me it had wood grain texture to it. So that's a possibility as well. And I guess it also just depends on whether the open concept of a fence is something that's needed. But again, in any of the codes, I've never seen anything that says the fence had to be open looking.
Commissioner Miller, do you have questions?
Yes, I just have a question. I just want to make sure the way that the diagram I'm looking at is one that has the orange lines and the blue lines. But whatever, is the intention to locate the fence both on your neighbor's lot line and on the opposite lot line that borders forest, right on the property line?
Which picture are you referring to?
Well, I'm looking at this one.
Okay.
I guess it doesn't really matter. Are you planning on putting the fence on both sides of your rear part of the lot on the property line? That's all I'm asking.
So if we're talking about the rear of the property, it would basically go to the driveway. So it's technically not even going to the alley portion. It would.
Yeah, I mean, in the north and would that be the north and south ends? Along
Forest.
Lot.
Okay, so we're talking about Forest and then the other side, my next door neighbor, correct?
Yes, right.
Depending upon, again, I put in, if I could put a higher fence on that end. She has a shorter fence on the side by her. I believe it's like 3.5 foot, maybe vinyl fence. It looks like kind of some with, so it depends on what I'm allowed to do. If anything, if I can put the size fence that I would like, I would probably ask her if I could take down that fence and put up the fence I wouldn't want to butt them up side by side, but it also depends on the size of fence that's allowed on the property to then forge forward with that.
And on the side of your property that runs along Forest, you'd put the fence on the property line?
Yeah, close to the sidewalk, yeah.
Okay, that's all I was asking.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry, I was not clear.
Oh, no worries. I know it's kind of confusing. I know looking at those surveys and directions, that's for sure.
Francisco, have you had an opportunity to draw the site triangle on the plat?
I haven't, but I was doing that just now. So let me pull up my screen. If you just want to give me 1 sec.
I sketched it, but I'm not convinced that I'm quite right.
Let me see. This scales out. Let me just double check to make sure that that is the correct scale. Okay. Oh, this is what I've got roughly for the 25 feet on.
You have, Francisco, you have to go back 50 feet along Forest, according to the,
So this is what scaled out on here. It might be wrong, but on, let me show my camera on my screen here.
no, your length along Kimbark is fine. It's
Yeah.
25 feet. But according to the site triangle in the code, it says that that longer leg is supposed to be 50 feet.
And here I have, I just drew it up on this paper copy I have. Let me highlight it for you. Hopefully, it's a very low tech solution to this, but so it's about where Mr. Scheinman said it comes out almost by that side door.
Which would be about, yes, that would be about right, because
Yeah.
that's the 40 feet that he measured for the 4 foot.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sorry about the low tech solution.
Other questions? Question for staff. One of the commissioners had asked if the Director of Public Safety had any concerns about this potential design.
Yeah, so we consulted with Director Buckley about whether there was concern from a public safety standpoint. And there are a couple of different ways of looking at this issue. One of them being that by enclosing the yard, which is runs along Forest, there's the protection of the occupants of that yard, whether it's children or persons or animals. Certainly, that's a benefit to having some type of enclosure. From a traffic standpoint, we asked about the ability for drivers to understand what's happening, be able to see, especially within this vision triangle area. There's a stop at at that intersection, and so there would be limited vehicle traffic that's whipping around a corner unexpectedly, seeing something there. So from that standpoint, there was not a lot of concern from them. There are other places likely within town where that might be a greater concern. However, They did, describe or kind of imagine what that visibility would be like with someone backing in and out of the driveway with a fence that would potentially obstruct that view, coming from, if they're driving west, I believe, along Forest, you'd end up encountering some of that either by the resident or visitors, whoever is using that driveway, being careful of backing out onto Forest, and of course drivers going along that direction and maybe not being able to see around that fencing. So those were the kind of key points and opinions of this, so that it could go really either way, of benefit or of a disadvantage, depending on which way you're looking at it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Sheeman, can you help us with one of the standards that we need to consider? And that's whether there's a hardship or practical difficulty resulting from the property?
Yeah, I would say just the unique positioning of the home. Now, if my house was centered on the center of a lot, we're not really talking about that much, land space. But since it's uniquely wedged up in the northeast corner, it takes away a lot from the property. If I strictly just went straight down from my house to the garage, I'm basically chopping my yard into like a whatever you want to say, a third of what it would normally be. So I would just think just where it's positioned on the lot changes that. And then obviously just being a corner lot too, but I'd say more of the position of the home.
Well, I did look at our interactive GIS map and looked at corner lots that have 2 street yards, and I stopped counting at about 24 that had the principal structure in the corner of the lot similar to yours. So I personally I'm not convinced that it's a unique situation.
And I also feel, the safety aspect, what we're talking about is having, a 4-year-old daughter and a dog and a side door as well. I don't have a back door to go to my house out the yard at this point at all. So it's uniquely positioned that way. There's not a physical back door. There's not my backyard is potentially my side yard as well. And for how busy that street is, and anyone that's ever driven on it knows that, or if there's a train and the backup and the amount of people that are on that street consistently every day, I would think to say that's probably the busiest street in the neighborhood. It's a major pipeline to get into downtown.
Yeah, Chairperson Mateo, can I just
Please.
add something to that?
Please.
I think what was, can you just repeat that the question again? I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. The uniqueness of the situation, or what was the criteria? I just lost my
Are you asking me or Mr. Sheeman's response?
I'm asking you. The question you asked him. Just so I can.
To help us with our first standard, the particular hardship or practical difficulty.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I had that right. So, I mean, I think one could make a strong case that the particular hardship it's unique in the sense that it's on Forest Avenue. I mean, I've been, looking at this, and it seems to me that he's right. I mean, Forest is an extraordinarily busy street. I don't think there's any. I mean, in the mornings when it's full of people going to RB or trying to get to First Avenue. Same in the evenings when they're coming back from RB, or the cut through traffic that we like to rail about. It's very, very busy, and it's far busier than it was 20, 30 years ago. It just is. There's in the mornings, I do my best never to drive my kids to RB because I hate being on that street driving. But it's in the mornings you can be, backed up almost all the way to the center of town. So I think a house like this on a lot like this that is also on Forest Avenue. I think that's, I think that might meet the criteria, in my opinion.
Thank you for that. I would add that I imagine there are people on Riverside Road, Woodside Road, Burlington, Quincy who say, oh, that's the busiest street in town, because I've heard them all say that repeatedly in other contexts.
They can say that if they want, but we're talking about Forest Avenue right now for this particular scenario.
Indeed, we are. Francisco, would you read the letters that were received, please?
Received a handful of letters. Let's see. First one is Riverside is a world famous landscape. It's world famous among landscape architects and city planners. Riverside has survived.
Can you pull your microphone down? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I forgot to put it up.
Thank you.
Riverside is world famous among landscape architects and city planners. Riverside has survived many attempts to spoil its parks and residential homes during its 150 plus years in existence. As a 40 plus year resident living in this beautiful village, I intend to preserve and protect and promote Olmsted Riverside legacy. Open spaces, lush landscaping makes Riverside a beautiful place to live. Subject in discussion is the variance request. John Scheinman, owner of the home at 40 Kimbark Road, has asked for a variance to put up a private 6-foot tall fence. The village ordinance 1073 F2A needs to be kept exactly as it is written, no fences on corner lots. This home has stood the test of time without a privacy fence, which does not fit into our landscaping history. Riverside heritage is important to our town. You may want to reach out to the Olmsted Society and the Riverside Garden Club and/or Riverside Historical Society for ideas on how to beautify his yard. No to the homeowner John at 40 Kimbark Road for his request on the variance. Diane, I'm gonna butcher her last name, I apologize. Jedrzejewski at 198 Woodside Road. The second letter is from Barbara Curie. Dear Mr. Jimenez, I am the board president of the Pine Avenue Condominium Association located at 70 to 72 Pine Avenue in Riverside, Illinois. I oppose the variation of ordinance 1073 F2A petitioned by said owner of 40 Kimbark Road, John Scheinman. It would detract from the ambiance of one of the entrances to our town and central district. Furthermore, his trampoline is a blight and he should be cited in order to remove it. If he wanted privacy in a fenced-in yard, he should not have purchased property on a main road in the town. That would be like me complaining about the lights of the fire station, which do not bother me in the slightest. In fact, I feel that the proximity to the fire station gives me a strong sense of security. Please vote no on the variation of the above ordinance. Thank you for your consideration. Barbara Curie, 72 Pine Avenue. Next one is no to a variance for a 6-foot tall fence at 40 Kimbark Road by Mr. Richard Jedrzejewski at 198 Woodside Road. And then another one is I'm writing to express my concern over the proposition of having fences on corner lots. I feel this would be a detrimental look for the village. Please consider this at the meeting. Kathleen Dutkiewicz. And the last one is regarding 40 Kimbark Road. And it states, I live at 44 Kimbark Road. John Scheinman at 40 Kimbark Road wants to install a 6-foot privacy fence enclosing his back and side yard. The fence would enclose his yard on forest almost the entire depth of Kimbark. Frederick Law Olmsted designed Riverside to have homes with stunning, lush green landscapes. How can you see a great lawn through a 6-foot tall fence? Did you ever walk into town along forest? As you enter walking past the forest preserve, you are captivated. You immediately connect with nature, smelling the greenery and flowers, hearing the birds. You know you are entering our beautiful, vibrant Riverside, the village in the forest. Next, you cross the Des Plaines River. It bubbles over rocks and branches greeting you. You continue on the tree-lined streets with our lovely gas streetlights toward our charming village center. But wait, the village in the forest has a wall at 40 Kimbark. How can this be? The forest does not have walls. Do you want to see a wall every time you come into town? Forest is a main street entering town. This 6-foot privacy fence is not in character with our town. It would detract from the charm, and it would certainly not say welcome to Riverside. Please decline the request. There is an existing short white vinyl fence between the two properties. It was installed after I moved into my home in 1998. Riverside ordinance does not allow a fence to be placed where there is an existing fence. As you can see, a fence is attractive and well maintained. I do not want a fence placed along my fence. Ordinance does not allow this. Ordinance states no fences on corner lots. Please follow the ordinance. All of the letters and feedback that I've received.
Thank you. Any commissioners have further questions for staff or Mr. Sheeman?
Chairperson, can I say something briefly?
Please.
In light of the what was talked about with all those other lots, I just wanted to, I think the PZC knows this already, but I just want to reinforce it. There's nothing about the fact that existing fences exist, that there's existing fences in other places in the village, in street yards, that binds you to approve this particular one. And that's the important thing to understand. You're not bound by it. You can take it for what it's worth, but each variation presents its own unique set of facts. And what I didn't hear was that this body has been approving these particular fences. Many of them appear to date back to time when there may have been different codes and were replaced in kind as allowed by the code. And so there's nothing about these existing fences that requires you to vote in the affirmative for this particular one.
Thank you, Attorney Morris. Any other questions for the public hearing portion of this? Mr. Sheeman, anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate your time. And I understand, you know, you want to keep suit with what the town looks like. And all I've been trying to do is improve this property, to be honest. It's been sitting idle for, I know, a long time. I think if any of you lived on the property as well and were on a busy street and had, you know, a kid or a dog, or you wanted to have, you know, be able to go in your backyard and not, you know, have it be safe, I think you'd want that as well. And purchasing the property and then reading the codes and everything like that, it's very murky. I don't think anything in the code would have ever had me even second guess that a fence could have not maybe put in there, because what I would consider a street yard, I would consider my side yard is a little different on a corner aspect of the lot. At the end of the day, I'm just trying to improve the property. I'm not trying, and I'll also make it safe for my daughter and for my dog. And I'm not trying to take away from anything within the landscape of, you know, Riverside. And I would think that the concept of Riverside to me is looking at the open sight lines of when you're driving through. I'm not necessarily looking into people's properties or backyards and seeing what their backyard looks like. If I'm driving down a road and obviously there's not a lot of, you know, squared up streets and things like that, it's unique where there's open spaces in between, you know, all the crossroads. I think that's what's unique about it. I don't think you're uniquely peekabooing in someone's backyard and saying, ooh, that's what Riverside's about. I think you're more seeing, yeah, you're seeing the forest, which I agree. You're seeing the river, which is awesome. When you're driving down a normal road, you're seeing that median area that's just wide open space. That's what I see. I'm not looking at someone's backyard or side yard and trying to gauge that's an open space. That's their private property. I'm not trying to look into what their backyard looks like. And that's where I'm trying to have obviously privacy within what you guys find to be reasonable. You know, if the height or whatever the dynamic you guys decide of what it needs to be, you know, if that's what has to happen, I understand that. And I'm not trying to take away from the beauty of the town. And that's why obviously people live here. It is a beautiful town and it's unique in a lot of the forestry and landscaping. But I don't think people are sitting there looking at other people's backyards and side yards and admiring that aspect of it. So the open concept I understand, but I also think it's a little unique. You know, just the positioning of the house and safety. And I don't have a back door, I have a side door and I have a big side yard. So hopefully, you know, can come to some sort of agreement to make everybody happy on this end. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm trying to make it look nicer for myself, obviously, and the neighborhood as well. I'm not trying to take away anything per se, but thanks for your time.
Thank you. Is there a motion to continue or close the public hearing?
Before we do that,
Please.
I had a legal question or maybe a statement for Attorney Mars. I don't know if that should be part of the public hearing or if we just wait until discussion.
Sure, go ahead and ask.
So can you, in my reading of the code and looking at this property, I don't see that the street yard that faces Forest extends all the way to Mr. Sheeman's garage. I see that it would end at the back corner of his house. That's how I read what the street yard is using our definitions.
Okay. So yeah, the definition of street yard, the open space between the closest point of the principal buildings to any portion of the property line that abuts a street.
Right. So applying that, the street yard would basically be in a plane that extends from the end of back of his house towards Forest. So once his house stops, the rest of that behind his house is not street yard.
Or conceptually, does it apply to the entire yard? Because I'll shut up.
So
and
there's
let-
another provision in the fence part of this regulation that says that typically you can't have a fence that would be breaking the plane created by an adjoining neighbor's front street yard. But that wouldn't apply here, in my opinion, because behind Mr. Sheeman's property is a public alley. So that's how I'm seeing the geometry of this lot.
Right, I don't know, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure the definition supports that interpretation. The closest point of the principal building. I mean, Ashley, do you have an idea of how this has been interpreted consistently by the village, looking at past cases?
Yeah, so say, for example, I understand where Commissioner Miller is talking about the front, that the fencing itself should not be applied that breaks the plane of an adjacent property. Pretend that his garage is an adjoining neighbor's home. That fencing that would be permitted would need to be behind that front facade of the neighboring property in order to be considered, as a permitted fence type. In some of those other cases where we clarified and said that the fences that were connected between the rear corner of a home and their garage, the one on Quincy, the one on Riverside, having closed off essentially their rear yard, that is how we would have applied fencing that would be on a corner property, but also have the ability for them to enclose a portion of that yard. It would be behind that side facade of their home to some other point in that backyard. So you'd be able to see it visually from the street, but the fact that it is behind that principal building structure would be how we would interpret and apply the code in those instances.
And I think that's why we saw examples of fences extending from the back corner of the house straight back to the garage.
Correct.
That is permitted because that is the rear yard. But anything that encroaches past that plane of the side of the house, between the house and the street, even if it's further back than the house, would be regarded as a street yard. That's been my traditional understanding.
Yes.
So that's the traditional understanding. I'm just wondering if that's what the codes actually says in the definitions, that's all.
And I think it does. I think you can read the closest point of the principal building as creating that plane that runs the entire length of the property between where that plane is and the street.
So would you say the street yard and the rear yard overlap each other?
No,
Because
the rear yard
has a
starts.
definition and the street yard has a specific definition.
Yeah, so let's look at the rear yard definition.
It says open space extending across the full width of a lot between the rear line of the lot and the nearest line to a depth or width specified and blah, blah, blah. The rest, it's not a very good definition. And then a street yard is the open space between the closest point of the principal building to any portion of a property line that abuts a street. And I think while it's totally legitimate for someone to say, well, I'm just going to put my fence continuing the line of the side of my house,
Mhm.
I just don't know if that's a legal requirement. And I'm thinking that this is an unusual lot in that it is not abutting another residential lot. It's abutting, and if it had been, then how I'm seeing it wouldn't apply, but because it's abutting alley, you don't have that other plane coming in of the street yard of the adjoining house. So I just wanted some clarity on the legal standards here.
Okay. So again, I understand what you're saying, but I think the definition, it could be clearer. I agree, but I think it can be read as it's been historically interpreted by staff. With the street yard running the entire length of the side of the property, anything between where the closest point of the house to the street.
So there'd be an imaginary line going from the rear corner of the house all the way to the rear property line.
Yes.
And everything to the opposite of the street side would be the street yard.
Yes. Ashley, do you agree?
Yes, I was trying to find a diagram within the code that would better provide a visual context of what we're talking about. As far as defining where we would determine a street yard versus a side or a rear yard.
There are some diagrams, like right on the opposite on the page that comes right before the definition of street yard. But my problem with the diagrams is I don't know if diagram is part of a legal definition or if it's just illustrative. And again, the diagram that's shown has an adjoining piece of property, it's perpendicular to the corner lot that has that existing front street yard. So it makes it confusing. The diagram doesn't clarify things for me.
Well, I do think if you look at 19A, yeah, the old, I might be looking at an outdated code, but
no,
is 19A still the same?
19A. How about I show my screen and see if you are thinking and looking at the same thing that I am looking at?
Yes, I'm 19A.
Okay. This is what staff often refers to when we're talking about, where we're identifying what type of yards, right? So there's this section here that's describing the street yard, that would be defining this kind of street yard area and repeats within that diagram the code wording here.
Right, I see that. And
yeah.
Is that incorporated in, I don't know where diagram 19A is referenced by a part of the text of the code. I'm not, do you understand what I mean? Or if it's just for an illustration? And I think
right. I think it's an interpretive aid is what I would call it. And I think that one at the top right illustrates what we're talking about, where you see that the street yard extending past the rear of the building.
Right.
Yeah.
I can agree.
You see what I mean with that that perpendicular piece of property there?
Mm-hmm.
How the line seems to continue from that property street yard to the corner yard because of probably the way this diagram was drawn to make it easy. But it's like a continuous line from what I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. That all the way to the rear That's a corner, which is a little bit more challenging as well, where their rear yard is significantly smaller. But this says too, that on a corner lot, the side yard should be opposite the longer street line.
Right, and so even in the diagram, it says each
Oh, I'm
street
sorry.
lot line to the
Opposite.
closest point of the existing building foundation adjacent to such street. So I don't know, maybe I'm being picky, but I want to be legally correct here. If there is no building, part of the principal building in the backyard, how are you drawing a line from the street to the principal building? You can't draw a straight line. So
Well, it's
that's
still
my dilemma.
It's still showing shading of the street yard past the principal structure.
Yes, it is, but I don't know why it's doing that. And two questions. Number one, is it a mistake? Or number two, is it because it's related to the perpendicular piece of property, the separate piece of property behind it, which has a street yard? And the fence regulation says that you cannot have a fence that would break the plane of the adjacent property's front street yard. But here we don't, in Mr. Sheeman's case, we don't have an adjacent piece of property behind his house. There's an alley.
I would agree with the alley and I understand what you're saying. And then in addition, I'm actually putting up even further away from that person's property because of the driveway.
Yeah, I'm not quite, I don't think that the illustration is against what the text wants to be. The street yards are clearly along the street, and then they end at the face of either the face of the building for those that are not on the corner, or they end at the side of the building, depending on how you want to define front and side. But I think as the illustration goes, the street yard is consistently measured from, and I'm repeating words, so I'm disappointed in myself here, but I think the sketch is pretty consistent with how we are interpreting street yards.
And I agree. Commissioner Miller, I understand what you're saying, and I think we can consider all this and clarifying definitions and diagrams for future code text amendments. But I think the definition is consistent with how staff has interpreted it. And I think for purposes of this case, you can say that it can be read a different way, but I think the diagram matches as well, and I think it's all consistent, and that's how you should consider it for at least this case.
I would also, this is Commissioner Pelletier, I would also offer that the adjacent property, although there's an alley in between, there is an adjacent residential property. And the diagram and the ordinance is trying to maintain that continuous open front yard for the properties that are facing it, and then the side yard that is perpendicular to it. So I feel like the intent of the ordinance seems clear to me, that it's trying to preserve the face of the building as the edge.
I would just say that at our last meeting, we had a decision that the alley that existed behind that Harlem Avenue property broke the concept that the residential district was adjoining or abutting the commercial district that was the Harlem property. So I'm applying the same reasoning here between properties as opposed to between types of zoning districts. And I understand, I would agree that in the past, I would have considered that exactly what Commissioner Pelletier said, that sort of conceptually, we just consider that whole thing, the street yard, that whole line, that whole part of the yard that's on, the side of the house, all the way back to the rear property line. But as I thought of it further and I looked at the definitions, I was confused. And when I drive around Riverside, I think part of the issue is that a lot of corner lots have the way that the houses are located on the corner lots. They sort of consume a large part of both of those edges of the property. So you don't usually have a large backyard on a corner lot because of the way the houses are oriented. So, but I'll leave it there.
Is there a motion to either continue or close the public hearing?
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing. Again, thanks for your time. I know that this is you guys do this more often than not, but appreciate your time. Regardless, if we could come to some sort of compromise, I understand sight lines, size of fencing, what's allowable or not. Again, I'm trying to contribute to, help the neighborhood look better, but also have, safety incorporated. And then also looking just at, a handful of other properties easily that we saw that are doing exactly what I'm asking. And most of those were permitted. So it's not like, there was a few outlanders that were not, but they were permitted to do so. So, I appreciate it. I don't know if this is it for me in the meeting or not, but regardless, appreciate your time, and hopefully we can come to a compromise that makes sense for, keeping the town look nice. And then, in addition, hopefully getting the fence in my yard would be fantastic. And Francisco has been really, very nice and polite and helped me through the process that I would have never thought filling out a fence permit back in October that I would be having to go through this in January. But regardless, thank you for helping. And then hopefully, I would say from, I'm not a lawyer, but there's a lot of really gray area in these codes that really, if you look down into it, the common person reads it, it doesn't really make sense. And even when you look at it more analytically, it's very hard to understand or even know. And as you guys are discussing now, it's still hard to understand what some of these even mean, and it's interpretive by who. It should be very clear cut and straightforward, not so much gray area in some of the coding that I think maybe makes more things come to the table for you guys as well. But thanks for your time.
Well, you reminded me that I should note that when the meeting is either continued or closed, discussion will be between the commissioners and staff only.
Okay. And is there anything am I let known via email, talk, phone call, or how does it work knowing that things went through or didn't?
You're welcome to stay. I'm just saying the further discussion during the closed part of our meeting will just be between commissioners and staff.
Okay, so
any final comments that you want to make, or have you already made it?
No, it's all good. Thank you. Do I have to stay on the meeting, or is that what we're saying? And then you guys reconvene? Is that how it works?
We're going to continue talking, and we'll have a motion. Most likely, if we close the meeting, we'll have a discussion. Somebody will make a motion to make a recommendation to the board. We'll discuss that, and then we'll go through our set of standards, and then we'll vote on that recommendation.
Okay, so the voting will happen today, and I'm supposed to stay, or do I leave and then I find out later?
You're perfectly welcome to stay.
Okay.
Most
All
do.
right.
You don't have to. I
Okay.
realize it's after 8 o'clock at night, and you have a
It's all
daughter and
good.
a dog.
That's okay. All right, well, thank you.
Is there a motion?
I would move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Oh, before we go, Chairman, can you make sure that there's nobody on the line who wants to talk in addition to the petitioner?
Is there anyone present on this Zoom meeting who would like to say anything else? Thank you, Attorney Mars. I made the assumption that nobody was, but it's good to check. And there's no one in the waiting room?
Correct. No one.
Okay. Commissioner Hennigan made the motion. Who made the second?
I second.
She beat you to it. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Brahm,
Aye.
Commissioner Peltier,
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
Aye.
and Chairperson Mateo.
Aye. Motion carries. So let's start with the discussion before we propose a motion. Any initial thoughts?
Well, actually, the petitioner had brought up 106 Northgate. And actually, in that case, we did approve the fence, but we also approved it with some compromise and some conditions. And specifically, it was a fence that was replacing a former hedge. And the fence ultimately was pushed back by that 3 feet along Northgate. And then as we saw in the picture, and this wasn't from my memory, it was left at 4 feet for the entire street or side yard, however you're defining that. And the only portion that was left 6 feet was the portion that would have faced 26th Street. And the specific issue there from that petitioner was that Northgate's rather busy and we have the signal there. And we had a lot of talk about what we wanted the gateway aspect to look like. And so ultimately it was, I'm summarizing, and if any of the other commissioners want to add to my summary, it was the fence was pushed back a little bit from the sidewalk and then also shrunk down in terms of height.
My memory was that their biggest concern were the headlights of cars turning off of 26 onto Westover, shining into their home.
I think that was part of it too. But anyway.
And further, I believe that was the unique situation that we found for that property and for that variance was that it's the busy street was 26th and it was vehicles turning off of 26th onto Westover and shining in their yard as they're turning, and plus frequently not needing to stop because it is a traffic signal as opposed to a stop sign. And I believe I've been on the commission for over 10 years, and I don't recall any other fence variances being approved by us. So that's the only one I'm aware of.
We did have one last year on Arlington. So it was an unusual situation. The homeowners owned 2 properties. One was a quarter lot, which was undeveloped, and then their home was on the interior lot. And they put the fence just like half a foot onto the empty corner lot.
Right.
And it was short and chain link going back to their garage.
My initial thoughts would be that the conditions for granting a variation are not met in this case. This is not an unusual condition. On the other hand, I believe that under the code, there is no variation required for a fence that would just be in the rear portion of the property. That's my reading of the code.
Like the one that was put on Quincy, 225 or 226 Quincy.
I guess, although that one, they didn't choose to go out to basically the sidewalk. They chose to put it, as I recall, straight down from the back of their house. So certainly Mr. Sheeman, I think, would have the right to do that. But I think the way I read the code and what a street yard is and the way that this corner lot is configured compared to the other corner lot and the public alley and all the rest, which I think is different than a lot of corner lots in Riverside. The way I read the code, I don't see why he wouldn't be allowed to put the fence to the sidewalk in his backyard, to the rear of the plane of the back of the house. That's how I read it. But again, I don't think that the case meets the conditions for a variation.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Hennigan? Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Hennigan should go first.
Thank you, Commissioner Marhol. I would agree that I don't see really any special circumstances that would differentiate this lot from any other corner lot within the village. In Riverside, we have irregular shaped blocks in a majority of the town, but even those still have at least a few corners on them. So I would be a little concerned as to what precedent that might set. In this case, granting this type of variation for a 6-foot fence along the street line.
Commissioner Marhol, what were you? thinking of saying?
I am sympathetic to the safety aspect of the petitioner, but I think right now, as proposed, I can't support it in terms of the variations being supported. We've got a number of community members in opposition, and I think the code is fairly clear with regards to street yards and encroachments into it. And that's one thing that we've always been very defensive of, is the street yard. If I recall, at Ames School, they had originally proposed a very tall fence, and ultimately they reduced that height to 4 feet, and then only at the plane at the front of the building. So I don't think the variations are supported.
Commissioner Braun?
I agree. I don't think that the variations are supported. I am concerned that while I am sympathetic of a hardship, I am concerned that allowing a variance would set a precedent for other corner lots. And I would agree with Commissioner Marhol and the other commissioners as well.
Commissioner Matthews?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I'm of the opinion that a variance could be supported. But first off, just to take a couple things in order. A couple of the letters in opposition to this, yeah, as we always see, make reference to the Olmsted plan. Now, someone can correct me if I'm mistaken, but this piece of Riverside was not within the Olmsted plan, is my understanding. I think that's right. I'm not 100% certain. I'm sure there's someone on this board who could tell us that. I've looked at the map, and I don't think it is. Yeah. I think this was carved out. This was, that big piece. It's just a big empty piece in that map, the famous Olmsted map. So, and then the other, when you talk about seeing rolling vistas and all that, I tend to agree. You're not talking about seeing rolling vistas into people's backyards. The safety issue to me is fairly compelling. I would find it extraordinarily difficult in good conscience to deny someone, the ability to enclose their property to preserve a modicum of safety for their family and a modicum of privacy. It's to me, I look at this house, and these residents, if they use their backyard, they're in full view of the world. There's no privacy. As he said, his child can't play out in that backyard at the age of 4. Maybe in a few years, but you are on a very, very busy street. I would argue that there are, looking at the findings of fact for variation. I think it is, at least the first section is met, because this is I'm trying to find the right words. The presence of an existing use, structure, exceptional topographical features, or other extraordinarily physical conditions peculiar to the subject property that amounts to more than a mere inconvenience. I would argue that the safety of one's family, or even the perceived safety of one's family, as long as it's a reasonable person could make the same argument, is, on its face, more than a mere inconvenience. My suspicion is that the majority of the board is going to disagree with me. So I would just add one more point. Is it perhaps worth thinking about that Forest Avenue should be added to the relatively small list of streets where this is allowed? I don't know when this ordinance was written, but as someone who grew up here and walked that street from RB home every day, pretty much every day, it was not as busy, years ago. And that was the 80s, but it's a very, very busy street now. There's no stoplight on one end, no other stoplights. Cars do, belt through there. it might be worth considering that if we conclude, or I would like to consider that if we conclude that we can't grant the variance.
I certainly support what Commissioner Matthews says as far as that goes. To me, it doesn't make any sense that 31st Street is included here. Forest Avenue isn't, because there are no street yards that adjoin 31st Street, and I live near there, so I know that. So I think that would be the solution here if the board wanted to do a text amendment and add forest to that provision, to that explicit carve out.
31st is the backyard of Maplewood. It's not anyone's front yard. It's not the residential area.
Right, it's carved out though in the fence
Yep.
ordinance that you can't have a fence in a street yard except for properties on 26th, 31st, or what, abutting a commercial area, non-residential use. I don't know why, I'm just saying I don't know why 31st is included and Forest isn't, because there actually is a residential lot in Forest that this would apply to. Anyway.
Because on Forest, for most everybody, the street yard is the front yard.
Right,
Not the
but I'm
backyard.
just saying on 31st is none that meet the condition. That's all.
It's to allow Maplewood residents to have a fence in the backyard.
But they're not, okay, all right.
And is, I think
And that's more of a
31st is.
Double
30
frontage,
Sorry.
sorry.
I believe 31st is a border street of the village, as is 26th. So I believe that's one of the reasons that those streets are listed, as Commissioner Mateo indicated, so that the residents of the village can have a backyard fence along a perimeter, very busy street.
Okay, I see that, right, I see what you're saying. But yes, I would support the amendment of the text, a text amendment to that extent.
I would be curious as to how many properties on Forest really have this problem. Because the majority of the properties on Forest, I think, face Forest. They're not, if I can recall. I don't think that there'll be many properties. If we do decide to include Forest in the list of streets that allow for a 6-foot fence, I don't think that there will be many properties that will have this opportunity to have a 6-foot fence.
They all would.
Well,
I mean,
no, the majority of the properties on Forest, if I recall, and I'd have to drive up and down Forest. First of all, Forest is not a very long street. It is extremely busy, but a lot of the properties on Forest face Forest as their front yard. They don't have a side yard on Forest.
Right, but the street yard wraps around the front of the house
Correct.
too.
So a couple of you mentioned the potential for precedent, and that's my biggest concern here is if at some point a fence is allowed in a street yard, especially a 6-foot fence right on the property line along the sidewalk, everybody's going to want one. Who doesn't want a fence in your front yard so your kids and your dogs can play? Whether you're on a corner or not, if you're on an interior lot, if one is allowed to happen, everybody's going to want to have it.
And
In Forest or elsewhere.
Well, it could be it could be phrased in such a way that not the true front of your house. You cannot enclose that street yard, but if you have 2 street yards or, that are perpendicular to each other, but the one that is on the side of your house for this purpose of having a fence. I mean, I'm just saying it could be word crafted to allow that and not just to say everyone could have a 6-foot fence in front of their house, in front of where the street borders, and then you just have a long wall along the every street.
Which we do see on Washington Ave in Brookfield. Are we ready to make a motion?
I just want to add that we're not, if we do not recommend the variance, we're not preventing Mr. Shaman from fencing in his backyard and providing his family safety.
Correct.
I believe a fence from the back of the house to the garage is allowed, a 4-foot fence, but that would still provide the safety to his family. So I just wanted to point that out. And although this part of Forest Avenue is not a part of Olmsted's plan, it is a part of the National Historic Landmark District. So to me, a lot of our ordinance is intended to help preserve, and in fact, I believe it's stated at the beginning of the ordinance that the intent is to preserve the historic district, the landmark status of the district. And it does talk about unfenced yards in the application for the historic landmark district. So one of the reasons for not having fences in the street yard is to preserve the open vistas of the streets.
Commissioner Pelletier is correct. Most all structures are contributing structures to our landmark designation, whether they were in the original plan or not.
Commissioner Pelletier, you mentioned that Mr. Sheeman could have a fence from the back corner of his house to the garage, but you said a 4-foot fence. Could that not be a 6-foot fence?
I thought it was required by ordinance to be 4 foot. I could be wrong.
Does the staff know? Because I thought behind your house, you could have a 6-foot, it just as he showed on his diagrams, 40 feet back from the front plane of your house or from the back of your house, you can have a 6-foot fence.
Yeah, I can read that section of the code here. This is from, I can't find the first part of this code, 1073 F3 notes that all fences and walls shall be a maximum height of 4 feet for a distance of 40 feet is measured from the front building line. So anything or to the rear of the principal building on the lot, whichever is less. And then after that 40 feet measured from that front building line, they could, or past the rear of that building, could be 6 feet in height as a maximum.
And just to acknowledge that there might need to be a gate to gain entry to that area, or a rear door in the principal structure be installed. More discussion?
I'll throw this out there. Like I said before, I can't support the variation, but part of me really wants the petitioner to come back with a fence that parallels where Commissioner Pelletier is speaking, and I could see a justification for a fence that actually did capture the back door or the side door to allow one to provide additional safety for the family. But what I'm describing is fairly nuanced, and it's a very limited area in front or into the street yard along Forest, say enough for a door swing. Like I said, that's not going to change my vote, but I could see the petitioner coming back to us with what I'm describing as a compromise position.
Well, we're voting on the plan that we were presented.
We are. My vote won't be changing. I think I've already said enough.
Okay. So is there a motion?
I move that we recommend that the variance be denied.
Second.
Okay, let me make a note. Let's go through the standards. The first one, and again, I'll read it in full, and I have a second screen. That's why I'm looking away from you all. Because of a particular physical or other unusual condition of the specific property involved, a particular hardship or practical difficulty to the owner would result as distinguished from a mere inconvenience if the strict letter of the regulations were to be carried out. Such conditions may include, but are not limited to, the presence of an existing use or structure, whether conforming or non-conforming, irregular or substandard shape or size, exceptional topographical features, or other extraordinary physical condition peculiar to and inherent in the subject property that amounts to more than a mere inconvenience to the owner and that relate to or arises out of the lot and or the structures they are on, rather than the personal situation of the current owner of the lot. Or situations in which the ordinance prevents the owner from reestablishing, restoring, or maintaining a material feature or significant architectural feature related to the lot or structure, or from maintaining the architectural integrity of the lot or structure. From our discussion, I suspect that the majority of commissioners feel that that difficulty or hardship has not been demonstrated. Commissioner Matthews feels otherwise based on safety. Any additional comments on that?
That's true for me.
Which is true.
The first part. I'm one
Okay.
of the many commissioners that don't feel that the first condition has been satisfied in this case.
B, the purpose of the variation is not based primarily upon a desire to increase financial gain.
That's true.
This would cost. C, the alleged difficulty or hardship has not been created by any person presently having an interest in the property.
I think that's true.
He's a recent purchaser. D, the conditions upon which the petition for variation is based would not be applicable generally to other property within the same zoning classification.
I think that's true.
Actually, I think that's exactly why we're struggling with this, is we do not want, as a zoning and commission, we do not want fences in our street yards.
So there are many situations in the village where this would apply.
Yeah, thank you. My words are not well formed tonight.
Well, I suppose I'm looking at it as a house with two street yards, not as a house that has a single street yard and putting a fence up in your front street yard that's in the front of your house. But as a corner lot, I think it is not generally applicable to other properties within the same zoning classification. Number of corner lots are a subset of all residential lots in Riverside, a small subset.
I think they're certainly a subset, but I don't think they're that uncommon. They're pretty much very common in this area that we're speaking of, this non-original Riverside plan, where all of the blocks are trapezoidal shaped, and in many other blocks, in all other blocks, there's at least one or two corner houses.
Right. So for me, though, the key wording is applicable generally to other property. It does apply to other lots, absolutely. I just don't think it's applicable generally. So that's my.
Attorney Mars, splitting hairs here a little bit. Same zoning classification. Is that R3 or is it residential writ large?
I would read that as R3.
Okay. Which is laid out pretty in perpendicular. It's not just you, Joel, it's both of us. So there are more corner lots in there.
Thank you.
Okay, E, the granting of the variation will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other property or improvements in the neighborhood in which the property is located.
I feel that it is somewhat injurious to the intention to have open vistas on streets, that if we start having 6-foot fences 1 foot or 2 foot off of the sidewalk, we're just going to have walled streets. So I do think that it could be injurious from the standpoint of setting precedents.
And it could perhaps negatively affect neighboring properties. If what they look out across the street is a big fence.
I think that, to your point, Chairperson, we also have the issue of the site triangle. And I understand Public Safety Chief Buckley's notation or identification that this is a stop controlled intersection. But in general, we need to make sure that the sight lines from vehicles are not impeded.
We also have the driveway issue with the backing up onto Forest Avenue. I think that the fence plan as presently proposed is dangerous to the public welfare.
Most notably to pedestrians on the sidewalk, because it completely blocks your ability to see pedestrians.
I don't want to extend this too much, but even as it is, the wall is not starting at the corner. It is starting 40, it is starting in the middle of his house. And at that point, it's a 4-foot fence as proposed. I don't see the sightline issue with this. Plus, that piece of property is raised up above the street. So anyway, I don't agree necessarily with everything that's been said about the sightline safety issue.
Well, that further obstructs if it's raised up off the street, potentially. F, the granting of the variation will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood.
I think that's the big elephant in the room, is that when we talk about altering the essential character of the neighborhood, we're also talking about the Olmsted plan and the historic district issues.
And G, the proposed variation will not impair an adequate supply of light or air to adjacent property or substantially increase the congestion of the public streets or increase the danger of fire or impair natural drainage or create drainage problems on adjacent properties or endanger the public safety or substantially diminish or impair property values within the neighborhood. Any thoughts there?
Go on.
I would just note again that the fence as it stands right next to the driveway and next to the sidewalk does block your vision of the sidewalk. So it does have a public safety issue. Otherwise, I don't have any comments on that.
Okay.
I think it's not met. But I think that condition is fine. I don't think that's been violated by this variance request.
Well, the neighbor had a concern about light or air being impeded.
Well, right, but people have a right to put fences generally on there, and your neighbor can say, well, I don't like the fact you put up a big fence, but if that's your right, then we have to do this with some common sense.
Final thoughts? Okay, please call the roll.
And again, just to restate the motion, it is a recommendation to deny the variation, correct?
Yes.
Commissioner Brom,
Aye.
Commissioner Hennigan,
Aye.
Commissioner Pelletier,
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
You're muted, John.
You're on mute.
No.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Marhol,
Aye.
and Chairperson Mateo.
Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Sheeman, so we are recommending body. This will go to the village board, probably not their first meeting in February, maybe the second. Looking to, Ashley's nodding.
The 17th of February.
And staff will remind you and let you know. And chances are that meeting will be in person, unless I just jinxed everything, but the plan is for February meetings to be in person at Town Hall in room 4. So thank you for your time tonight.
So what you're saying, there's another meeting, or this is it? I didn't really understand what you were saying.
So we don't make final decisions on variations. We make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, and then they make the final decision.
Okay, and then one other thing that Joel, I don't know how to say your last name.
It's all right.
you were saying, same thing. My last name is Sheeman, but it's been said wrong all day, but that's all good. If, let's just say, obviously plan is not working, if we want to do a variation or, a different outlook of it, especially with my side door being encompassed, I think is huge. I mean, we're talking about busting a hole in my back of my house to try to have a backyard. How does that go about? So obviously this next meeting, you recommend from what happened here, they then decide completely at this next meeting? Because I'm not sure the process, that's what I'm asking.
They will decide on our recommendation based on the plan that you submitted.
Okay. And let's just say if that's in denial, I know Joel had said something about if you want to do a tiny thing difference to incorporate my door, that would be a completely whole new entity of coming and doing this again.
Yes.
Or is that something that you can just put, asterisk, so to speak, in what we would try to do?
No, that would Commissioner Chairperson Mateo, I apologize. I'm really word salading tonight. I believe, yes, you would have to come back before us and with a thoughtful proposal that this commission could recommend to the village board. I am making great effort to not put words in your mouth and to give you the freedom to repropose something that would be agreeable in light of the discussion you heard here tonight.
Because I was personally under the impression that that's what this whole thing was about, to figure out what can and cannot be done. Obviously, I put in what I wanted, but I was under the impression that from your guys' advice in doing this, that then this would be compromising, because I obviously thought within a certain reason that mostly what I was going to get, I wasn't going to get everything that I would have liked, but I was under the impression that after discussing it would be, figuring out what is, especially with the sight line of the stop sign and all those different things, that, okay, maybe that aspect of it change how it's done. But this is just straight up concrete as this is what it was. That's it. We'd have to do this process.
You're welcome to bring an alternative plan to the village board, and they can possibly remand it back for consideration or take other action if they see.
So it would basically be going through this process again, correct? If that was the avenue, depending upon what they go about.
That would be up to the board and depending on what you present. But if you want to work with staff on alternatives based on what you've heard here, I'm sure you can bring that up at the board meeting. We'll take it from there.
All right. Appreciate it.
Okay, next on our agenda. We have no new. Sorry, let me find my agenda. We have no old business. Next is new business, transit-oriented development, zoning and sign code updates and discussion.
Sorry to interrupt. Am I good to go? I'm
sure.
Done. I love
Thank
being
you.
in the
Have a good
meeting with
evening.
y'all, but I appreciate your time. You guys have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.
Assistant Village Manager Monroe.
Yes, good evening. We can elaborate on this discussion as much or as little as you prefer this evening. We thought it would be useful to introduce the subject of the Planning and Zoning Commission addressing the recommended code updates for the zoning code on the subject of the transit-oriented development supportive zoning updates. I have a short presentation. It's not to rehash the presentation provided by the consultants selected to assist with this process, but just an introduction so that anyone who's following planning and zoning matters and not necessarily the detailed work of the steering committee that's happened prior, so that we can essentially introduce the topic and to, I guess, create a pathway for further discussion and evaluation of each of the recommendations by the steering committee and the consultant. So I will explain exactly what I just said. I'm going to share my screen and provide a very short presentation. I'll leave the screen up just to perhaps facilitate further discussion, but I will just preface this on it being our zoning code updates that are related to transit-oriented development. This project was, see, here is a purpose of doing so. The primary issues at hand, the reason that this was brought to attention, we had an opportunity to have assistance and technical assistance from the Regional Transit Authority and CMAP, so the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And so the three kind of major ideas was to adopt code standards that support pedestrian and bicycle friendly development. So we can talk more about what that means, but generally it's exactly what it says, something that is from a pedestrian scale, appropriate for the village of Riverside, that bicycles and pedestrians can safely use our streets, sidewalks, and any applicable trails, that there would be appropriate bicycle parking or ways that otherwise promote or enhance the community that would allow for additional walking and biking. And a lot of the time there are elements of development when you're thinking about buildings, land use, and planning that contribute to encouraging that usage. We want to clarify and provide better direction on some of our signage standards. We have a code that addresses particular elements of signage in one aspect when you're talking about business districts, and then the other zone business district doesn't address that signage at all. And so this is just to create some unity, some clarity on those sign standards. And then furthermore, kind of looping back into this transportation element is to prepare the Harlem Avenue corridor for PACE's Pulse Rapid Bus Transit Service. So there's been a longstanding plan to provide that service, and in making certain changes to our zoning codes, we may additionally provide support for the regional corridor, as well as residents that could, and businesses that would be calling Riverside home. So timeline, as I said, there was a grant awarded that was actually awarded back in 2019. The great portion, once it got started, was waylaid by the pandemic. And so that consisted of quite some preparation for this project in 2020. 2021 saw the public feedback elements come into play, and the great share of steering committee meetings. So there is a 5-person committee that was selected by the village board for review of these plans. There are resident members. There's a liaison from the village board, as well as 2 liaisons from the Planning and Zoning Commission that sit on that steering committee. And so the work that they've been doing with the planning consultant, Egret and Ox, and Savoy Consulting has been to walk through our zoning code and identify areas by which we could make changes. And so there are approximately, with all the notes, almost 200 pages of content with notes. And so I apologize for the length of this. They've indicated within those changes, there's been several iterations of those, by the way. The most recent, the second round, has taken into account a lot of, if not all of the feedback by the steering committee and the public feedback received. And that's what you have before you and posted on our website for further review. That's what we'll be using to come up with a review, a plan for review, and any recommended changes by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any proposed text amendments would also at some point visit the Preservation Commission to ensure that those standards that adopted, they provide feedback on how that would impact potentially our historical status and landmark status, and certainly incorporate additional feedback by the Village Board of Trustees. So the plan to adopt is in 2022. It will be a process. As we mentioned, I think in prior Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, the contract that we have with the consultant assistants runs through May of this year. We were fortunate enough to get an extension, and so that's what that's where we landed, with the hope that we would work our way through a good portion of public discussion of the language that would be used in the code updates and arrive at something that could be presented to the village board later this spring. There's a lot of material, and so it may come in pieces or as one package, but that's just kind of to be seen. We'll do our best while we have the aid of the consultants. So as the memo that I provided in the packet very briefly described, there are primary issues that the consultant identified that are addressed by the updates that they're kind of walk through and are recommending. I won't read each of these things, but you can kind of see what, there's everything from our density, height, bulk. We would establish a new zoning district, which I'm going to hit on in a moment. What we do with our commercial areas, everything from storage to parking in alleys, loading zones, what type of use might be permitted on a ground floor in a business district, what type of, even for that matter, what type of office use or commercial use might be appropriate, is up for discussion in these updates. And then of course the revision of the sign code, as I had mentioned. So there's quite a bit of meat to go through. What I was hoping to address, just not overloading everyone, and certainly open it for discussion by this body for whatever you'd like to talk about this evening. But we thought that it might be helpful to address at minimum the establishment of a new zoning district, and then take any other discussion and feedback. I also noted the density, height, and bulk regulations, which are related to the TOD zoning district. So I'll just kind of provide a very brief overview of this, and then we can return to this with any discussion by the commission. But there are 3 current zoning districts in B1. There's sub-districts of that. So what I did here, just noted the existing per standard code language, and then pasted in the recommendation for proposed language. And so the B1 commercial district is generally, it's predominantly found on the Harlem Avenue corridor. I should have included a map with this presentation. We could certainly pull one up. But it's predominantly service establishments, office uses, vehicular traffic oriented. And they're mixed use development as well. You often see the commercial area with residential use on top. So there's a significant mixed use in this area. The proposed language, I'll note in each of these sub-districts, goes back to the purpose of this code updates, where it's enhancing those roadways as well as pedestrian and bicycle access from the adjacent neighborhoods and connectivity to transit. So each of the new code updates you'll see in each of these sub-districts, as well as in the B2 commercial district code changes proposed, note that bicycle and pedestrian access and then transit access. So this is just a simple kind of inclusion of that. And it's a little bit of cleanup of that language. There's a second existing district in B1 is called a transitional district. It's very similar to the B1 along Harlem Avenue. There's a little bit that kind of, it's up on Quincy and Burlington area where it starts to transition into a residential zone. And so the use might be lighter in there, a little bit less vehicle traffic, and is, potentially an area where building height or, mixed use of those buildings might be seen less frequently. This as well, like I said, just kind of adds that pedestrian and bicycle friendly component. There's only 2 more slides, I think, in this. So now what the work of the steering committee has come up with is to add a zoning sub-district in this B1 area. It's the only new zoning district that's recommended or asked about. And that's to be very specific and intentional about our transit-oriented development. So this reads as proposed code that the sub-district, which is centered, I guess, on Harlem Avenue, it's fairly centered, and we'll again pull up this map, but it's centered along Harlem Avenue within Riverside, and supports, as it says, multifamily residential, retail, service, office, employment generating uses. It's centered towards the railroad and in close proximity to nearby bus and commuter rail facilities. So the placement is intentional, and residential uses would be permitted above the ground floor only. And then the uses would also appropriately transition into those surrounding districts, continuing with this mindset of pedestrian and bicycle friendly, environment. My last slide of the presentation today, I just wanted to show you, your discussion is up to you, but we also hit on the building heights in case that was a desired element of discussion this evening. So we have a chart here, and I can certainly go back to it as necessary. Essentially, they're adding or recommending an added minimum building height. We have a maximum building height, of which is revised slightly in the B1 districts. And then they've included this segment where we would include a minimum of 24 feet as the building height. So it's more in feet, not as much reliant on the number of stories in a building, just based on the types of uses that you might be able to have within a business district. So you might have a commercial entity, commercial property that's only a single story, but the height might be taller to accommodate whatever that business might be. And so the committee had opted to, I think a preference for a foot measurement rather than by story. So that concludes my kind of overview of discussion. We certainly could pick up any other topic, but I wanted to be prepared on a couple of these items and at least kick off the discussion, identify what elements you might be most interested in addressing at this or your next meeting. So we'll close and hand it back to Chair Mateo.
Thank you, Assistant Village Manager Monroe. That was nicely done. So as you've seen, these are hundreds and hundreds of pages of proposed changes. They are just proposed. We can recommend those to the board. We can make changes to it. We can do whatever we want. I wanted this to come to us tonight kind of as homework. So between now and our next meeting, try to read it. Try to go through the red lines so that we can have a full discussion. Many of those pages, you're going to look at it and go, yeah, fine, yep, fine, fine. It's truly minor. Maybe they're adding in bicycles or bicycle parking or bike access. Okay, that's going to be fine. It's the more substantive things that Ms. Monroe highlighted that we really need to spend our time talking about and debating. So building heights is probably going to be something that will catch the public's eye. Whether or not having a different commercial district is something that we'll need to discuss. You know, what are the potential benefits? Are there any potential costs to doing that? So between now and again, our next meeting, I hope that you can carve out some time, you know, when you can't sleep, to go through those red lines so that we're prepared next time to start going through it. How we're going to do it, I don't know. I don't think we're going to go page by page. I think we'll go topic by topic as outlined here. One question I had for staff, and I see Attorney Mars is no longer with us. This isn't an 8-page amendment. This is so big. How are you going to track tweaks that we want to make to it? Besides the usual way? I mean, is it as simple as that?
I mean, I would suppose that the goal will be to, as I haven't personally been through or at least not in the last decade, I haven't been through a code update of this magnitude. You know, often the easiest way, like you said, is just kind of taking it topic by topic. I attempted to identify when and where those things show up in this memo. It's not perfect, but using the consultants work, kind of those tables that they referenced where you can jump to a certain section as a guide for those major topics and issues. So what we might, you know, identify is whether we want to, you know, address, like you said, by topic rather than a full scale update to the code. It may be broken into sections or segments where we bring forward text amendments, you know, each month instead of in a full package, because there's so much here.
Okay.
And conversation may, you know, evolve over that period of time where a decision made on one item could potentially reflect something different than you'd prefer. So I suppose we should be open to that and certain that whatever is brought forward for amendments to the code, that we have general consensus.
I don't know if I mentioned this at our last meeting. So the village's first zoning ordinance was adopted in 1922. So assuming the village board approves a change this year, it'll be 100 years since our first one. And Riverside was one of the first communities in Illinois to have one, in part to preserve what will become our landmark status. Too many homes were being torn down, so they needed a zoning ordinance. The last big update was in 2005. I don't think this is anywhere near what was done in 2005, but you know, we want to get it done, but we want to take our time and do it right and have enough public meetings so that businesses and residents have ample opportunities to opine on potential changes. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions?
Questions mostly. For if we have questions on how some of these elements were developed, are they better forwarded to Ms. Monroe? For example, an initial thought was, how was the difference between the facade height and the building height seen as significant, or why is there a difference there? Are those legitimate questions, or do you want those ahead of time? are those easier to process in between meetings?
Yes, so generally, yes. So if you have questions as you're reviewing the document, and have questions about how decisions or recommendations came to be, it likely because neither myself or Francisco were part of staff when the initial proposal and request for, this project came to be. While we work in the code and we certainly see the need for many of these changes and understand why we're doing it, we were not present in the initial meeting. So there are things that may be present in the minutes of the steering committee that would give us context, past memos from staff that we can catch and try and identify. If you haven't been reading all of those either, we can try and see what the rationale or reasoning was for those. I'll note that the steering committee, they have draft minutes that have not been approved from some of the meetings in the fall that have some more information about how the bigger issues maybe that were still needed additional discussion had come to be. And so we're waiting for the committee to come back and approve those minutes, in which case that might also aid us in providing additional information or background that could help discussion here.
That makes sense. And I didn't express it very well, but basically my goal in asking that is why and what were the thoughts of the committee in making that recommendation, so that by understanding that, then it probably makes it much easier to accept or have that further discussion here.
Sure. I would also say to remind you that we have two members of the steering committee on this commission, and so having taken part in that, they were the ones discussing it and could probably shed additional light on those meetings and what that rationale was.
And I'll also point out that sometimes that type of question can be answered and other times it won't be. It could be something that the consultants just recommended, and given the totality of all the recommendations, it just might not have hit our radar, or like, okay, fine, or we just don't remember. Links to the Zoom recordings of our meetings are available. So if you were really, really having a hard time sleeping and could extract from the meeting minutes which meeting it was from and could go to that Zoom, you're welcome to do that. There are other times where we would remember. So for example, why are in the maximum heights changed from the number of stories to the number of feet? That one I remember, and that's because one of the steering committee members who does commercial real estate said, Starbucks doesn't want to have 2 stories, but if you tell them they can build up to 24 feet, they're fine with that. So that's why we went that way, for example. So again, sometimes answers will be available, sometimes they won't.
And that's absolutely fair. I think what you said was that I have skimmed it. I have not read every revision in detail yet, but having skimmed it, many of those recommendations are, yes, it's just fine and we can probably move on. So I'm assuming that it's the big items that would be remembered or would have been documented somehow. The other question I had, and I am also looking at a second screen, in our packet from today, in the primary issues portion of the memo, first page, it identifies some page numbers. What page numbers are those referring to? Because I cannot correlate that to the 12/2/21 village board packet.
Yes. Okay. So that is it's essentially the start of the of the memo for the zoning code update. So it was not a page number that would correlate with the agenda packet, like the PDF page, but it would be the page identified for, you know, whatever that might be. There's discussion of, you know, parkings, alleys, and loading in business districts. You know, you start with page 6, where it in that memo packet with the code red lines, where you would be able to find that. If it requires additional clarification, I can certainly provide an updated memo with more instruction on which page numbers to follow.
That would be helpful. I was specifically trying to look at the ADU rules and even searching on accessory. The word accessory wasn't super helpful because there's a lot of accessory word. There are a lot of mentions of the word accessory in the document.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I had trouble kind of narrowing those down, in which case was the reason in the first place I tried to give a page number to help. But if it wasn't navigable, then we will make some updates and try to make that easier to find.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to go through too much work. Even if you tell me a correlation, that's good. If page 4 and 5 on our planning and zoning agenda where it says see page 4 and 5 on the memo from community development happens to refer to some other, if I need to add 5 pages to find it in the VBOT agenda packet, then just tell me that.
Okay. We can probably separate the zoning memo with the red lines as its own document, and that should help.
Whatever you think makes sense.
I had a similar question. I just wanted to make sure I know what the definitive document is that we're supposed to be looking at when we're looking at these red lines, because I had a little trouble navigating or relating the page numbers and all the rest. So is it whatever is attached to our packet for tonight, your 4-page memo and the links and the links that are embedded in that? That is what we should be following.
Correct.
Okay. No other, we don't need to look at the Todd steering committee page or the village board page or anything else, just what you gave us tonight.
Yes, so you can look at the TOD steering committee page for those, you know, additional context of those meetings and that information. But what I think makes sense is we will we'll pull out those most recent second draft red lines, and we'll provide them to you, and we will also post them maybe on the Planning and Zoning Commission page, or you know, as being discussed. I don't know. I don't know if that would be recommended, Chairperson, or if you prefer that they just stay on the steering committee page with all the other documents. But we'll certainly get them to everyone.
Let's talk about it, because we do put it on PZC's website. That's another way of making it public.
Yep. Okay.
So there would be sign code red line, zoning code red line, sign code memo with jump links, and then zoning code memo with jump links. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Other questions, thoughts?
I have sort of a general question. This whole pace pulse bus thing, I know nothing about it. And is it a reality right now in other communities, or any background on that?
I am actually meeting with the consultant team tomorrow on a different related transit issue, and I will get some updates for us on that. I think it would also be helpful to have a status update. So it's a good question. and something that I will look into and communicate with RTA about regarding the, the plans or how close we are.
A different answer is, which is also true, if you go to the village website and search steering committee and then go to our project page, there's resources or documents. One of them, there are a couple of sites there that have all you could ever want to read about the project, including the last time the documents were updated, what the current status is. So there are different routes that are in different stages of development or completion. So Ashley will find out what's happening with Harlem, but there are other ones that, are actually happening.
Thank
Okay,
you.
It would be nice to know if I don't know that any of them are complete actually at this point, but if there is, it would be nice to know where that one is.
Can I just went to the webpage. Milwaukee, Cermak Road, Harlem, and Roosevelt are all in the planning stage, or actually, I should say the corridor planning and visioning stage. Others have already been implemented or are in more advanced stages than Harlem, Cermak, and Roosevelt.
The pessimist would say nothing's happening in the short term, but we're planning for it. Other questions? Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for February 23rd. Is it still the case that we don't currently have any public hearings scheduled for it?
We have one potential one. I'm waiting for them to hopefully turn in their stuff. It would be for sort of variation for non-conforming structure. They're trying to extend their rear deck, I believe, to accommodate. I think it's a hot tub, but they would need a variance for that proposal. But I'm waiting to hear back in terms of application and everything else from the property owners.
It may be likely that we don't make the time frame in which we would need to have in order to properly prepare and post a notice. There's a published date of next week, and so we're really battling that time frame, in which case we want to make sure we are doing things right. And so you may not have one. We don't know.
Okay. You might get an email potentially trying to reschedule our regular meeting. I'm going to be out of, I don't want to publicly say this, I cannot make it, and I want to be here when we next discuss it because I'm one of the people on the steering committee. I'll discuss that with staff. So we might try to reschedule that. If it can't happen, then it can't happen. But right now it's scheduled for the 23rd of February. One last question I had, were we able to determine who is considered the zoning administrator now?
Oh, you did leave us with that question.
You've been a little busy.
Yes, that question slipped my mind. I'm writing it down right now.
So commissioners, sometimes in our ordinance, a task is assigned to the zoning administrator. And when we had a community development director, that person acted as the zoning administrator. We no longer have a CDD. So now we need to identify who that will be. Maybe it's the assistant village manager, maybe it's the village planner. Stay tuned. Maybe we'll hear next month.
Thank you for the
is there
reminder.
any other information?
Nope.
Motion to adjourn?
Before we adjourn, Jill, I just wanted to point out that I will not be able to attend the February 23rd meeting either. And since I'm the other person who's on the steering committee for the TOD updates, we might, if we have that meeting on that date, we definitely want to postpone that discussion.
Thank you very much for letting us know. Appreciate that. All right, you'll be getting a doodle poll, folks. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Please call the roll.
Right, Commissioner Marhol,
Aye.
Commissioner Hennigan,
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Brahm,
Aye.
Commissioner Pelletier,
Aye.
and Chairperson Mateo.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for your work tonight. Before tonight and tonight, stay safe, and we'll see you next month.